This is what alerted me to the Indian problem leading up to the War of 1812. This is from the Territorial Papers of the United States, Volume 16, 1809 to 1814. Acting Governor Pope to the Secretary of War, Illinois Territory. As the tranquility of this territory depends materially, perhaps almost immediately, on part of the Union, upon the result of deliberations of the next Congress, I beg leave to call your attention to it. From the best information I could attain, I have directed the affairs of this territory. I'm strongly led to believe that the British emissaries from Canada have been preparing for the worst. In event of war with England, will exert themselves to arm the Indians of the Mississippi and Lake Michigan and send them upon our frontier. They have been endeavoring to collect all the foregoing Indians at Detroit in this month. I cannot imagine what can be the object of this convention unless it is the effect of general combination against the United States. The British merchants have deposited at Prairie du Chien about 10 to 12,000 pounds of powder and the equivalent of balls of various sizes suitable to the guns of the Indians. This ammunition will be immediately dealt out to the Indians when the war shall be proclaimed. If that resource can be cut off, the Indians will not be able to do to us any immediate injury. I therefore suggest the propriety of my having the earliest possible advice of war, if declared, that I may seize upon all British property in my territory. I mean such property as can be useful to the Indians in the attack upon us. This is the first considerable deposit of ammunition ever made at that place by the British. It seems, however, not to have attracted the notice of Mr. Bullivant, Indian agent at that post, implying that he is an infiltrator. Mr. Bullivant, Indian agent, allowing the Indians to stack, or the British to provide the Indians with 1,000 pounds of powder and balls. He must have seen it. Yet, Mr. Bullivant, Indian agent at that post, must have seen it, yet does not mention it in any of his communications to the governor of the Louisiana Territory. This latter received it from the private individual and advised me to seize and read and powder and have it deposited at Fort Bellevue, and then detained until we should know unequivocally the dispositions of the Indians. But I have not think that this circumstance justifies such a rash and violent measure. General Clark, who is the Indian agent for several nations, who would be benefited by the distribution of this ammunition, thought with me that it might be productive of many evils. It might facilitate the coalition among the different nations of the Indians so desired by the British. Besides, Bullivant, the Indian agent, having bestowed no attention on the fact, to wit, of the powder and ball being there, I did not know that such a step ought to be taken upon the information of an individual. In the event of war of this territory, every foot on which may be called a frontier ought to be furnished with arms, ammunition. Lead can be had here, but powder is scarce. I cannot at this moment state the strength of the militia. No returns have yet been made. I am of the highest respect, sir, Nat Pope. To the Honorable William Eustis, Secretary of War, Washington, D.C., May 11th, 1809. Nat Pope, relative to the hostile views of the Indians and the negligence of Mr. Bullivant, the Indian agent, asked Governor Lewis to inquire. Anyway, this shows how infiltrators and traitors were on both sides. It's difficult to know who is loyal to the United States at this time and who is loyal to Britain. And most of these agents came down through Canada. As we will see, most of the Mormon infiltrators came through Canada, emigrated over from England into Canada. John Taylor was one of these, came down, converted to Mormonism, and thereby worked against Joseph Smith. And as my theory states, Joseph Smith was leading, on behalf of the United States, interracial Native American settlers out west to provide a bulwark against the British invasion coming from the north and the west. Oregon Territory, also controlled by the British at that point in time through the Hudson Bay. But you see that funding was scarce, even for the United States, to provide powder and balls. And Nat Pope was begging to be provided with provisions and also authority to seize this stockpile of powder and provisions funded by the British and stockpiled in order for the Indians to take up arms should the War of 1812 break out, which in fact it did. But what is curious about this is he is doubtful as to who is whom. He's saying that the Indian agent for the United States, Mr. Beltrain, appears to be a traitor, allowing the stockpile, but he's writing Washington to find out, is he a traitor or is he acting under the authority of the United States? Nobody during this period of time, including Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, nobody knew who was acting on behalf of who. It was brother against brother. Basically, this is part of the reasons why all these different warring factions had their different handshakes and different signs to identify which side the person was loyal to. And this is brought out by John D. Lee and I believe Hosea Stout, that even the Mormon garment was meant to convey to the British that they were Mormons and loyal to the British invasion of the United States during the Civil War. Hence the Masonic symbols clearly embroidered on the Mormon temple garment meant that you were loyal to the crown of England. And it is still to this day, all Masonic fraternal orders swear their loyalty to the crown of Britain. It was due to this fact and the William Morgan murder controversy that precipitated anti-Masonic political party, because it was discovered and openly publicized that these Masonic fraternal orders were in fact traitors to the United States and loyal to Britain and ready to raise up arms against the United States. So while there are many stories about the supernatural powers of the Mormon garment to save the person's life, it did in fact save the person's life leading up to the Civil War, as conveyed by Hosea Stout, who said that you would just break open your shirt and show your attacker that you were a loyal British subject. In my last video, I left you with the information gleaned from the Lucy Mack Smith biography on the Smiths, that the schooner on which Mormon saints were being transported from New York to Ohio was indeed the schooner previously owned by her uncle, General Mack, indicating that the Mormon movement out west had state sponsorship. So I found it indeed interesting as another data point that there are additional admirals involved with the Mormon movement. In a John Quincy Adams reported biography on the Mormons, he states that Hill Cumorah, the mount on which the Mormon plates were discovered, was in fact owned by an Admiral Sampson. Admiral Sampson, owning the Hill Cumorah on which the plates were discovered, produced the Book of Mormon. Well, I had to look up Admiral Sampson, and this is what I found. And this is how I do my research. It's like breadcrumbing, just data mining. When you find little incidental references, look them up, find out what they mean, because it's these linkages that allow us to put together the puzzle pieces in order to see the bigger picture than the one we have been spoon-fed, and that is actually a fake history by these purported Mormon scholars. So I looked up a William T. Sampson, and here he is in a Wikipedia entry. William Sampson was a United States Navy Rear Admiral known for his victory in the Battle of Santiago de Cuba during the Spanish-American War. And of course, he was born in 1840, but making him too young at the time to be involved in the discovery of the plates at the Hill Cumorah. But more than likely, this is the family that John Quincy Adams was referring to, and probably mixed up the fact that this Rear Admiral Sampson, who was the son of the original Sampson that owned the Hill Cumorah, just the con of just another linkage. And it's very much like LinkedIn. If you link people together, you can be pretty certain they're communicating with each other and they're knowing probably each other's business. So I just found this an interesting linkage, sort of like the Jeffrey Epstein little black book with all his political connections. A lot can be gleaned from such data points. So again, this is just another connection between the Mormon Church, the Lucy Mack, General Mack, a noted family of a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy owning the Hill Cumorah. So here's another Navy connection with the Joseph Smith family. This is Admiral Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith, Admiral, born 1790 and died about 1877, was a Rear Admiral of the United States Navy who served during the War of 1812 and the Mexican-American War. Well, is this Joseph Smith, Admiral, related to our Joseph Smith Jr.? Well, there is an Uncle Joseph Smith that was the brother to Joseph Smith's grandfather, Azazel Smith. And a further connection, because you have to understand, these are very small communities at the time, and cousins and brothers and sisters were all within a locality, more than likely related. Here, Smith was born in Boston, Massachusetts, entered the United States Navy as a midshipman in January of 1809. Now, this definitely is within the locale of the Smith Topsfield, Massachusetts Smiths. Boston is also a city well connected with Mormonism. In fact, a lot of the early abolitionist Bostonian Mormons were located in Boston, Massachusetts, indicating that this was a state-sponsored movement to move the interracial Native Americans out west under the Indian policy of Andrew Jackson. And as you recall in a previous video, I quoted Joseph Smith telling Charles Adams that he was a Jacksonian Democrat. Joseph Smith supported Andrew Jackson and his policies until he became a Whig and then became a Clayman. Also telling Charles Quincy and John Adams and Charles Adams that he despised Tyler to a Tippecanoe. And this was 1 month before Smith died, with Smith conversation indicating to me that he had no idea that he happened to be running for president at the same time that Henry Clay was running for president in 1844. But let's see, if he's not the brother of Azazel Smith, he could be very well a cousin. It goes without saying, I'm going to show you in the future just all the connections with Abraham Lincoln, William O. Douglas. I mean, Joseph Smith is so well connected with high politicians. Even Charles Quincy, John Quincy Adams' cousin, visited Joseph Smith 1 month before his death to assess the political temperature of the Mormon community in Nauvoo. But here, let's just take a look at this. Possibly could be the Joseph Smith Sr. here that is considered a brother. Further research has to be done. I'm just pointing out data points. Anyway, here's Azazel Smith, and his brother is indicated to be Joseph Smith Sr., and not much is known about him. He's the son of Captain Samuel Smith and Priscilla Smith, brother to Priscilla Kimball, Samuel Smith, Vashti, and Azazel, and others. So it says, it doesn't say the date of his birth or death. Could he be a contemporary of Azazel? Now, Azazel was born in 1744, so it's highly unlikely he's this brother, but he might be Joseph Smith Jr. He might be this Joseph Smith's son. This has to be further discovered through other documents. And the most likely documents are going to be shipping records and land grants. And I'm putting it out there to you all. You can start doing this research also, and we can finally put together perhaps the truth.
It's a strange world we live in. All we want is living, searching for things unspoken. We can't hold this joke in.
Fact. Both Smith and the Mack family were not only highly influential, but well-educated families. No, they were not ignorant country bumpkins, as the Utah Church wants you to believe. Joseph Smith's great-uncle John Smith, brother to his grandfather Azel Smith, was considered at one time the most highly educated scholar in New England, being the first professor at Dartmouth College and instituting a curriculum involving ancient languages of Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, Chaldean, and Coptic, an ancient Egyptian language, which could be characterized as Reformed Egyptian. This is where Joseph Smith Jr. and Hiram Smith became familiar with ancient languages. When I read by Charles Quincy that Joseph Smith was bragging about his facility with ancient languages, I just chalked that up to Joseph Smith being just a jovial braggart. But now when I see that he came from a family educated in ancient languages and even introduced the curriculum of these ancient biblical languages into North America, well, now I know that he wasn't just bragging, but he was actually telling the truth. By now, I hope you're realizing that the truth is always more interesting than the lies we have been indoctrinated since birth. So, reading from Kathleen Melanakos Kimball's book about John Smith and Dartmouth College, let's begin. Moore's Charity School was founded in 1754 in Lebanon, Connecticut, by the Puritan Calvinist minister Wheelock to provide education for Native Americans who desired to be missionaries to the native tribes. Second son, Hiram, attended Moore's Academy Prep School at Dartmouth between 1811 and 1815. Hiram and his cousin, Stephen Jr., that's Stephen Mack Jr., half Native American, spent time in their youth drinking from the same fountain of some of the most learned members of their day, including the Wheelocks, Solomon Spalding, Stephen Burroughs, Father Eden Burroughs, Reverend Ethan Smith, no relation, and other Professor John Smith, which was the first cousin to Azazel Smith. John Smith attended the first boarding school in America, Doomer Academy near Topsfield, where Azazel Smith's family lived. He displayed an aptitude for academics from an early age, studied Greek and Latin under the classicist Samuel Moody. In 1778, was appointed the first professor of Dartmouth. Soon after, he developed the ancient language course and the first to include Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Chaldaic, Syriac, Assyric, and later added Arabic and Coptic Egyptian languages to the curriculum. So these were the courses that Hiram Smith and Stephen Mack Smith were exposed to. Now, for some reason, the Utah Mormon Church has gone out of their way to conceal the fact that the Smith brothers attended this Dartmouth College for Native American boys, received highly prized education. Wikipedia entry: John Smith was a professor of Dartmouth College and the author of the first unpointed Hebrew grammar book published in the United States. Smith was born in Byfield, Massachusetts. Graduating Dartmouth, he moved to West Hartford, Connecticut. Smith arrived in Hanover in 1771 after graduating from Byfield Academy. From his early interest in Greek and Latin, he soon proceeded to master Hebrew, Chaldaic, Arabic, and other Oriental languages. In the late 1790s and early 19th century, he prepared a remarkable set of theological lectures. His theological work was so appreciated by the Free Will Baptists of Brown that he was granted a Doctor of Divinity degree in 1803. He was in the final stages of preparing his theology lectures for publication in 1809 when he died. His work generally anticipated the efforts of Joseph Smith in the development of the Mormon doctrine.
It's a strange